Hello and welcome to our interview today with Isobel Rimmer, author and educator. And she's here with us talking today about Present with Presence, everything you need to know to plan, prepare and deliver with impact. So Isobel, welcome. Lovely to meet you
Thank
and see
you.
you in
Lovely to be with
person today. So, Isobel is a founder of international training and development consultancy Masterclass Training and an author of the wonderful book Present with Presence, which was published in the autumn. With 25 years as a business leader, coach, mentor, she has designed award-winning leadership programs, and organisations she's worked with include organisations like Hertz, PwC, Accenture and IBM, helping leaders plan, prepare and deliver with impact. So Isobel, thank you. But first of all, I would like to just mention some stunning statistics which we were learning about. So the amount of people who suffer with imposter syndrome is really phenomenal. And that's something that our audience knows about through having interviews and webinars, conferences, etc. And around 70 to 84% of people experience imposter syndrome, according to Psychology Today. And then there were government statistics about high achiever rates. Approximately 25% to 30% of high achievers may suffer from it. And then you come up with this amazing term, glossophobia. Is that the one?
glossophobia.
Yes. So the statistics of that was 75%. So perhaps you can open by explaining what the term means. And I think that's a pretty important way of opening up that really this is a topic that is relevant to everybody.
It really is, Fiona. Now, I was running a workshop recently and I said to everybody, who knows what glossophobia means? Does anybody know what it means? And one young guy said, is it a fear of gloss paint? I said, well, good attempt, but no, it's not actually. It's a fear of public speaking. And apparently, more people, like you say, the stats would suggest somewhere like three-quarters of the population are either afraid or fearful or very afraid of speaking in public, whatever that might be, whether it might be speaking at a wedding, whether it might be presenting at work, maybe it's a Teams call online or being interviewed. But yet people are terrified, more scared of it than snakes, and more scared of it than flying, and apparently more scared of it than death.
Everybody in business at this time is responding to a lot of pressure, financial pressure, time pressure, and they're all wanting to do their best. Talk us through your book, really, and explain what people can do to reassure themselves and really not lose the impact that they can have and particularly is needed in these difficult times.
Well, and I think you sum it up beautifully there, Fiona, because the pressure is on people to be able to do all these things naturally, very quickly, and very easily, often without any training or very little training. You've got to step up, you might have to make an announcement, you might have to deal with some tricky situations. And in a way, that's kind of, if I take it right back to where the book started from, because I remember, growing up and feeling very nervous whenever I had to speak or go on the stage or, read something. I remember being at university and being really struck by the exchange students that we had from the US who seemed to be absolutely comfortable, absolutely confident, standing up talking without, it would appear, any notes, where the most of us, most of us Brits, were like, oh, and very nervous. And really, we'd never been shown how. So when I chose to put this book together, this is my second book, and I was keen to kind of take away all the fear of presenting and speaking and to share what I've basically learnt over the years. I was lucky, I got good training early in my career, what I've learned and how, in a way, I've overcome my fear of public speaking, glossophobia. And it's because I've learnt, and I now teach and coach and train techniques that help you. And if you take it right back, the starting point is around preparation. I can't tell you the number of times when I've coached somebody, and often I get the call and they'll say, yeah, or so and so gets a bit nervous, or can you come and work with our CEO because they don't come across with the impact or the charisma that we want. And the first thing I nearly always ask is, how do you plan and prepare and structure? And most of them go, well, I get a few slides, or I write down a few notes, or I do a bit of a brain dump. And I go, yeah, but how do you know where you want to go with your talk? How do you know how to structure a presentation? And for me, once you get that bit right, that's the first part. So the first part of the book is all about how you plan, prepare, and structure. The second part is then how do you deliver it? How do you then bring in the voice work, the posture, the body language, things like prosody with your voice going up and down beautifully. And again, it's all learnable, it's all trainable, so long as you invest the time and the effort and you practice. And the book gives you kind of a set of recipes to help you go through that.
As we know, it's International Women's Day shortly here in the UK, so let's just think about some of the areas that really might help them. So they could be going for an international assignment, they could be wanting to speak at a big meeting, they could be asked to present at a corporate conference on representing their organisation, or they could be going for, say, a new career role or on a board member, because as we know, yes, things are improving with the percentage of women in boards, but it's not great, and it certainly isn't 50%. So perhaps we can have a bit of a focus there on some key things that will particularly celebrate International Women's Day as it comes up.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things to rest assured, and this would be for anybody who's going to be speaking or presenting, is you're probably talking about a subject that if you're not an expert in, you're certainly very, very well qualified to talk about. So worry not about that. So when people get nervous, I always say, do you know what your topic? Do you know what you have to talk about? And they go, yes, it's my job. Or if it's an interview, it's about me. It's all the things that I know about me. So I go, well, that's fine. Because the thing is, if you're being asked to speak on something that you know nothing about, honestly, best to say no. But then it's about how do you position where you want to take it. So my starting point with anybody is, first of all, think about the topic and capture that so you know what you're going to talk about. Then think about, who am I going to be speaking to? Now, I call that the audience. Well, sometimes it is a big audience. Sometimes it's an audience of one or two. Perhaps it's an interview. Perhaps the audience is a team when you're on a virtual call. And perhaps you're presenting an idea to a client. So the first thing to do is to think about, who am I talking to? And try and put yourself in their shoes. Now, by doing that, a couple of things happen. One is you take the, if you like, spotlight off yourself and you put it onto the audience. Because one of the reasons people get so nervous is because they feel very self-conscious when they speak. And when I'm coaching people, I say, not about you, it's about what your audience gets from listening to you. So you take the spotlight off you and you focus it on the audience. Now, once you start thinking about it from the audience perspectives, you can think about, what is it that they want? What is it that they need? What is it that they're going to be looking for? And then you can think about what they're like as people. So if you were presenting to a board, you might think, okay, who's going to be there? Are they the sort of people who want overview? Are they the sort of people that want some detail? Are they the people that are going to want just to be very quick and organised and move on fast? And then you can really kind of get into their shoes. That's the first step. The second step, and I put all this into my framework, which I call Izzy's Diamond. The second step then is to think about, with that audience, what do you want them to go away thinking, feeling, that's a really important one, saying, doing, or knowing as a result of what you're going to talk about. And I get people to write that down. So if it was, say, a woman going for promotion, what is it you want that promotion panel to think about you? How do you want them to feel about you? What do you want them to be saying about you? What do they need to know about you? And what do you want them to do as a result of that interview? And you capture that. Because what you can then do, knowing who the audience is, knowing what the outcome is that you want to achieve, you then capture all the key points that you want to talk about to that audience to achieve those outcomes. Now, I worked with a very lovely speaker, a young lady who is quite dyslexic, and she struggled because she was trying to bring in too much stuff, too
Mm.
many, too many things, with all the right intentions. She wanted to really help her audience, who are quite technical people. But of course, the more she brought in, the more confusing it got. And what she was tending to do was to sort of think in her head and go off topic. So what we did was we did that technique. We looked at the audience, we looked at the outcomes, we brainstormed all the things that she could talk about. And then I said to her, right, we've got to take it down to two, maybe three key points and no more. And she was like,
Mm.
oh. Now she can do it now. And she said it's made a massive difference. And she can plan and prepare in probably 10 or 15 minutes just because of that.
But I do think for people and people of maybe neurodiverse people, and maybe creative people with lots of ideas, it's really quite difficult for them
Mm,
to
mm, mm.
synthesize it down. So what's a tip, do you say? Do it practice with colleagues, or is it
Yes.
just something that comes and don't be afraid, just go on and practice?
Well, the practice is good if the structure is good. So that's it. That's the key thing. So with my approach, as I say, two, maybe three key points. If you're going to be presenting for, let's say, 10 or 15 minutes, if you're doing a 20-minute session at a conference, I've just been training some senior executives in a cybersecurity company for their global kickoffs, which are, they're only speaking for 15 or 20 minutes.
Mm.
They can only get across two or three key things. They can't do more than that. They can't do more than that. And the reason you want to stick to your two or three things, and this is true of everybody, regardless of their kind of diversity or neurodiversity, is that once you've anchored the two or three things, that's what you stick with.
Mm.
Because when you face your audience, your brain can work much quicker than your mouth. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself going off all over the place.
Yeah.
So I show them how to do that. And then I say, right, anchor it on your fingers. So today we're going to talk about two things, A and B. And then you talk about the two things. And then you summarize the two things. And that way you keep it really tight, not just for your benefit, but for your audience. Because then they know exactly what's coming and they know what to expect and they know what they've got to do. And they know there are two things they've got to remember. So
Mm.
it's like a win-win for everyone, really.
Exactly. And then you also talk a lot about trust, and I think there's a famous trust equation or something, because I think in these days, particularly, people are wanting to develop their own leadership style, and that may be very different from 10, 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago, and particularly post the pandemic, this sense of trust and authenticity, and that's a word that's used a lot. But also, if you're asking people to do something, your audience, whoever that is, and in a job role, you would need to reassure them as well, and so they're trusting you as an individual. So perhaps you can tell us how you bring that authenticity through, because as you say, some very bright people are often talking technical jargon or whatever. Their audience may understand that, but they're still the leader or the person imparting important information. So the fact that they're human and empathetic. So how do you combine all of that?
Oh, there's lots in there. So if I just touch on the trust equation first, and that's based on the work of Charles Green and David Meister. And it's a beautiful concept because what it says is that if you think about people who you trust and how you can build trustworthiness, which when you're speaking, that's really important. You want your audience to warm to you and to trust you. And the key things that help build that trust are being credible, so knowing what you're talking about, which might mean you have to share a little bit of your credentials, and not everyone's comfortable doing that. You need to
Mm.
tell them why you are qualified to talk on this subject and not just go, oh, shucks, anybody could do it. No, because
Mm.
you are qualified to do so. So there's that credibility piece. There's being reliable, so doing what you say you will do. And there's this thing that they call intimacy. How do we create that intimate space? And as a speaker, one of the ways to create that intimate space is to divulge a little bit of yourself, to be a little bit self-deprecating, maybe to show that you've made mistakes along the way. And when you look at some of the very credible speakers and some of the big names out there, they do that. Watch a TED Talk and people will talk about the mistakes they made. And Steve Jobs famously used to do this as well at his talks. But also when you want to build trust, and this is the denominator in that trust equation, it's about what they call low self-orientation. So what that means is, do I come across having you, my audience's best interests at heart, or do I come across as though it's all about me? And the more you demonstrate you have your audience's best interests at heart, or your clients, or your stakeholders, the people that you're speaking to or working with, the more they will feel that they trust you. If at any point they think, actually, this sounds like she's trying to get something from it, or he's trying to get something out of this more than me, trust gets broken very quickly. So when we're presenting or speaking, it's really important that we focus on what matters to our audience and that we connect everything that we're talking about to things that matter to them. And that's the way to help build that trust. And you've got to do it from an authentic position, for sure, and you've got to do it from a human position as well. And one of the things that I do a lot when I'm coaching people is show them how to use stories and case studies or personal experiences to help create that authenticity and to help build that trust. Because when you use a good story, it shows your credibility, you know what you're talking about. It shows that you do what you say you will do. It shows that you've got other people's best interests at heart. So a great story connects on all of those things. And storytelling is a wonderful way of not only being an interesting speaker, but being an authentic and a trustworthy one.
But let's just say there you are in the middle of you've started and it's going well. And then suddenly this, whatever you call it, imposter syndrome, glossophobia or whatever, and you're thinking, oh, can I see my next slide or whatever? How do you get those things under control? And I thought you had some very interesting little anecdotes by naming this.
Often these things are when we don't quite believe in ourselves. And we get, in my case, I call my little thing parrot on my shoulder, I call her Polly. And because when you have a little voice in your ear or in your head that's saying you don't know what you're doing, or you're not good enough for this, or you've seen the other candidates for this job and they're all better than you, it's very easy to then believe that you can't. And so having that self-belief, sometimes we have to be quite firm and say, like, no, go off, get lost. I'm here because I have experience, I have knowledge, and I bring something of value. And so I think it's important that people get that support or that coaching at some point. Not everybody suffers from it, so that's good news, but a lot of people do. I remember working with a lady a few years ago, very talented, very able. She was working for one of the big consulting firms, and her daily billable rate was something like $1,500 or $2,000 a day. And she said, I don't think I'm worth that. She said, even my dad doesn't think I'm worth that. And I said, that is the fair market price for the level of work that you do. Now, of course, she wasn't getting paid that, because that was what they were billing out at. But when you've got these little voices in your ear, even your dad saying, oh, really? Are you worth that? It's hard. So you have to remind yourself, actually, no, I am worth it. And not in a nasty or arrogant way, but because you are.
And people in public life, there's a different sort of intruder, could be somebody disrupting and heckling.
Yeah.
So do you have any tips for that, which can happen and very often in inclusion and diversity subjects or around ESG or in a board meeting? It could be the public there wanting to have their say. How do you sort of take control and keep going.
Well, there's two. I think there's two ways of thinking about this. There's how do you set up for success so that you avoid, particularly in perhaps more of a corporate business setting as opposed to being a comedian on stage. How do you set up for success so you get less heckling? And how do you then deal with something if it does happen? So for me, when I'm training somebody, my focus quite a lot is on their introduction. And I use a framework, I call it ABCD. ABCD stands for get their attention. B is the benefits to your audience, so you state that right up front. C are your credentials, so that who you are and why you're there and why you're qualified to talk about it. And D is direction. So you guide your audience where you're going to go. So, for example, I might be saying to an audience, over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to share with you our plans for Q1, and we're going to go through a breakthrough of the financial data, and I've allowed for 5 minutes at the end to take your questions. So that by the end of this session, you're clear on what we're going to be doing, how it's going to work, and the implications for cash flow. Now, if you do your D for direction well, then you will discourage people heckling and you'll discourage people jumping in because they now know what to expect. So the D for direction not only guides you as the speaker as to where you're going to go, but it guides the audience about what's going to happen. So they're less likely. It doesn't mean they won't interrupt. Some boards particularly will. But it means there's less chance of them jumping in with things that you're going to deal with down the line. Now, if you are going to get some hecklers, and you probably will, you don't have to respond on everything. So you can give yourself that permission. And you can, of course, have what I call some stop phrases. So things like, well, that's a very interesting point that you raise. And we're going to be covering that later. So you don't necessarily need to get drawn into every little heckle. So you won't stop how you might react, which might be annoyed or nervous or worried or whatever, but you can choose how you respond. And the best way to do that, to your point, Fiona, is to practice, is to get somebody to throw a few things at you, make a few statements, not necessarily questions, but chuck a few kind of, well, I can't see how that's going to work, comments, and then you practice it. So you get used to the reaction and you get used to thinking about how am I going to choose to respond to that? And there's lots of techniques where you can say deflect to something else or build a bridge to something else. It's about practice.
And the first time someone sits in a boardroom, they may feel quiet and not taking it all in and not really knowing how to get into the thrust of the conversation. Have you got tips for perhaps those quieter people? They've got something important to say, but there's a lot of robust conversation.
So if we're talking, let's take the context of a physical room where we're perhaps in a boardroom and maybe you're naturally more of an introvert than an extrovert, and maybe there are characters around that board table who are naturally very extrovert and will tend to speak up and speak out and possibly speak over people as well. For me, the starting point is to think about the physical space that you take up. Perhaps play along with me on this, Fiona. If you're feeling a bit nervous, your elbows will probably go into your side. You're more likely to feel a little bit more closed in your body language. You may well sit on the edge of your chair, and there's a reason, psychological reason for that. It's because we're getting ready to run away. And our eye contact is probably not around the room as much as it should be. It may be more down. So starting point is physically think about your space. Now we joke about a thing called BBC, bottom in back of chair. So you get your bottom to the back of the chair. And that means that you can be more upright in your posture. You can then take your elbows out to the side and own the space. So if you own the space in that boardroom and you own the space on the table in front of you, and you're not making yourself small, you're in a better position to be able to use your eye contact around the room to get somebody's attention. And then you can lean forward into the space to make your point. Now, again, you need to practice these things because if your natural tendency is to make yourself a little bit smaller and to feel it's not your place to speak up, then guess what? you're not going to speak up. So you sort of have to go through the sort of the uncomfortable stage of being becoming more comfortable. The more you do it, the more comfortable you become. But a lot of it starts from the physical space that you take. Also, what tends to happen when we're nervous is instead of breathing from our diaphragm, we tend to breathe from our upper respiratory tract. So we end up breathing up here. And for women particularly, that can make your voice sound quite short and perhaps even a little shrill, and because you're not breathing from down here. So practicing your breathing gives your voice more resonance, so that when you want to make your point, your voice comes out stronger because you're projecting your voice from your diaphragm and not from up here in this upper area. So there's lots of things that you can do, lots of things.
Well, this is all fascinating. So, afraid we must nearly draw to a close. But just let's, if you could recap on some of the fundamentals that people need to know about or think about. What is your routine when you're
Wow.
going forward?
So I have my if I'm going to be speaking, even if I get a 5 minutes notice to be doing something, or 5 weeks notice to do something, I always do my little prep. My topic, audience, outcome. I always practice and work on what is it I want my audience to go away thinking, feeling, saying, doing, or knowing. So I get my preparation done. Then when it comes to the live piece, I use a power pose, and I do a 2-minute power pose, which I use what I call Wonder Woman, hands on hips. And I can't always do this if you're in the room, but if you can do it before, hands on hips, feet apart, looking out. And the evidence, based on the research of Amy Cuddy from Harvard, is that 2 minutes of a power pose gives you about 15 to 18 minutes of confidence, because it increases your testosterone, which means you feel more confident, and it reduces the cortisol, which is the one that causes stress. So that I do 2 minutes of that. I warm up my voice doing a few little exercises, one of which is this: ba-da-ga, 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 ba-da-ga. I do that while I'm doing my power pose, and that gets my lips, mouth moving, and I practice my breathing as well. And one of the best methods to get your voice ready for breathing is what I call 4x4 breathing, box breathing. Breathe in through the nose for 4, hold the breath for 4, out through your mouth for 4, and hold for 4. And then you repeat it. And that's a technique I use with a lot of politicians if they're going to be on radio or TV, because nobody can see you're doing it. So people who are going to be on, say, Question Time, or going on the Today programme, or Sky News, they can practice the 4x4 breathing, and no one knows. Some of the other techniques are a bit obvious because they're sort of, you can't do that if the camera's on you. But 4x4 breathing you can do anywhere, and it's brilliant. And there's loads more.
Brilliant. Well, there's some fantastic tips, and I'm sure that's a good place to have them right at the end so people know. So, everybody, this is the book, Present with Presence, by Isobel Rimmer. So, Isobel, thank you so much for walking us through what there is in the book. It's all absolutely fascinating, very well put together, wonderful summaries at the end of each chapter, so you can feel you can dip in if you have an emergency or read from cover to cover. So thank you so much for joining us, and we very much hope you'll join us again sometime to help us on our journey with causing impact and present with presence. So thank you very much, Isobel.
Pleasure. And thank you, Fiona, for inviting me on today. Thank you.
So you can find out more about Isobel Rimmer and her book and her previous book as well on the slide following. And in addition, here's some short biographical details. I'm Fiona Murchie of Relocate Global and Think Global People, and you can find more about our websites, digital content and videos on the websites relocateglobal.com and thinkglobalpeople.com. So thank you very much for joining us today. Goodbye.